If you had asked me a year ago, 6 months ago, even a month ago, if I thought my marriage would ever fall apart, I would have laughed and told you no way. My wife and I had been together for 8 years, married for 5. We had a good life, or at least, that's what I thought. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. We traveled when we could, had a nice home, and from the outside looking in, people probably thought we were the perfect couple. And maybe for a while, I believed that too. But if there's one thing I've learned in the past few days, it's that nothing is ever as perfect as it seems. That I should have seen the signs. I look back now, and it's so obvious. The little things that didn't add up, the small lies that I brushed off because I trusted her. That's the thing about trust, you never think you'll be the one who gets burned until it's too late. My wife, Melissa, always had this way of making me feel like I was the crazy one whenever I questioned her about anything. It wasn't outright gaslighting, but it was close. She would laugh off my concerns, make me feel like I was overreacting, always had an answer ready for everything. And for years, I let myself believe her. The changes started subtly. At first, it was the sudden interest in traveling more. She had always loved vacations, but over the last year, it became an obsession. She talked about how she wanted to see more of the world, how she felt like she had wasted too much time stuck in one place. I didn't think much of it at the time. Who doesn't want to travel? I agreed with her. We both worked hard, and I figured if she wanted to start taking more trips, we could make it happen. But then it became something else. She started booking flights on her own.at first. She had excuses. Work trips, visiting a friend, a solo getaway, because she needed space to clear her head. I didn't argue. I never wanted to be the controlling husband who told his wife she couldn't go places or do things on her own. I trusted her. I encouraged her to take the trips, told her I'd hold down the fort while she was gone, but then, the flights started getting more frequent. More last minute. More secretive. I remember the first time I felt something was truly off. She had booked a weekend trip to Miami. Nothing unusual about that. She loved the beach, said she needed a break from work stress. But when she came back, she was different. Distant. Her phone was glued to her hand. She was smiling at messages, tilting the screen away whenever I walked by. I asked her how the trip was, and her answers were vague, almost rehearsed. She didn't have the usual excitement when she talked about it. She didn't show me pictures. That should have been my first clue. Over the next few months, things got worse. The intimacy between us started fading. She would come home from these trips and barely touch me. Always tired, always distracted. I tried to talk to her about it, but she brushed it off. I'm just stressed, she'd say. Work is a lot right now. Another excuse, another lie. The worst part is, I believed her. I wanted to believe her. Then came the night everything changed. She was leaving for another trip, this time to Los Angeles. Another quick getaway, or so she said. But something wasn't sitting right with me. Maybe it was the way she was rushing to pack, barely making eye contact, or the fact that she had booked a first-class ticket when we usually flew economy. I told myself I was being paranoid. That there was no reason to doubt her. But as she was finishing up, her phone buzzed on the dresser. She was in the bathroom, so I glanced at the screen. It was a message from a number I didn't recognize. Can't wait to see you up here again, gorgeous. I'll have the cockpit ready for you. I froze. My stomach dropped. Cockpit. I wasn't stupid. I knew what that meant. And suddenly, all those solo trips, all those flights, all those weekends away, they all made sense. That I didn't touch her phone. I didn't need to. I just stood there, staring at the screen, my pulse pounding in my ears. A pilot. She was cheating on me with a pilot. Someone who saw her every time she flew. Someone who had been meeting her in cities I didn't even know she had been in, and I had let it happen. I heard the bathroom door open. She walked out, saw me standing there, and immediately her eyes flicked to her phone. She knew. She knew, and in that moment, I saw it: real fear. Real panic. For the first time, Melissa didn't have an immediate answer. For the first time, she was caught that I stood there, staring at her phone, my mind blank, my body frozen. My eyes stayed locked on the screen as if I needed to see those words a second, third, fourth time to fully process what they meant. It was strange how quiet the world became in that moment, how everything around me, the hum of the bathroom fan, the muffled sound of traffic outside, the rustling of her suitcase as she moved, all faded into nothing. There was no dramatic explosion, no instant confrontation, no screaming or accusations. There was just silence, a deep, suffocating silence as the weight of the truth settled in my chest like a heavy stone. And in that silence, my mind started racing, piecing together every single thing I had ignored, every red flag I had brushed off, every tiny, seemingly insignificant moment that should have told me something was wrong long before this. That it wasn't just the solo trips or the expensive tickets or the sudden love for traveling without me. It was the way she had started dressing differently, the way she had been picking out outfits that weren't meant for quiet dinners or casual sightseeing but for attention, for admiration, for someone else's eyes. It was the way she had started spending more time in front of the mirror before she left, checking herself from every angle, making sure everything was perfect before she walked out the door. It was the sudden obsession with perfume, the way she had started spraying just a little extra on her wrists before heading to the airport, the way she had started carrying makeup wipes in her purse when she never used to care about freshening up on long flights. And then there was the secrecy, the way she guarded her phone like it held the nuclear codes, the way she would turn it face down whenever she sat next to me, the way she would tilt the screen just slightly away when she typed, thinking I wouldn't notice. I had noticed. I had noticed everything. I had just convinced myself it was nothing, but this was something. This was everything. This was the truth, ugly and undeniable, staring back at me from that screen. My wife was having an affair with a pilot. A man who lived in the sky, who probably met dozens of women just like her, who had perfected the art of seduction at 35,000 feet. He had been waiting for her, planning for her, making sure everything was just right for her when she stepped onto his plane. And she had gone along with it. She had let herself become part of whatever game he played, another woman in another city, another affair hidden in the clouds where no one could see. And then she had come home to me, kissed me, smiled at me, told me she loved me, knowing full well that she belonged to someone else in the spaces between. My hands were shaking. My breath was shallow. I felt like I was trapped in a slow-motion nightmare where I could see every detail with terrifying clarity but had no control over what happened next. My mind tried to offer up excuses, tried to rationalize, tried to cling to the last thread of hope that maybe, somehow, there was another explanation. But there wasn't. There was no misunderstanding, no innocent reason for the words I had just read. She was cheating. She was gone in every way that mattered. The woman I had married, the woman I had trusted, the woman I had built a life with, had made her choice long before this moment. And now, I was just the last to find out. I stood there for what felt like hours, though I knew it was only seconds. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating, pressing against my chest until I could barely breathe. I looked at her, and she was moving, still packing, still pretending everything was normal, still playing her role as the loving wife heading off on another trip. I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, to force her to look me in the eye and say the words out loud. But I didn't. Because suddenly, I realized I didn't need her answers. I didn't need to hear the excuses she was already preparing in her head. I didn't need her to tell me what I already knew. The truth was in front of me, clear and sharp, and no amount of lies could erase it now that I had spent years loving someone who had no problem betraying me. I had spent years building something that she had quietly been tearing down behind my back. And now, the only thing left to do was decide what I was going to do with that truth. The version of me from yesterday, the man who trusted her, the man who would have believed her even when he shouldn't, was gone. And the man standing in his place wasn't going to let her get away with this. Not without consequences that I stood there, watching her, my mind racing in 1,000 different directions but my body frozen in place. I could hear the sound of her suitcase zipping shut, the casual movements of someone who had done this a dozen times before, someone who had mastered the art of deception, someone who had walked into this room with a perfectly rehearsed lie ready to go, never once expecting that I would already know the truth. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't hesitating. She wasn't acting like someone who had just been caught. And that made it even worse. Because it meant this wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't just a moment of weakness or regret. This was something she had done with full confidence, without guilt, without hesitation, and if I hadn't seen that message, if I had never picked up her phone, she would have gone on like nothing had changed. She would have boarded that plane, walked through that airport, found her way to whatever secret hotel room she had waiting for her, and she would have let him have her again while I sat at home, waiting for my wife to come back from a trip that was never about work, never about relaxation, never about anything other than him. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was the realization that I had been so blind, so trusting, so convinced that my wife, the woman I had built my life with, the woman I had shared everything with, would never do something like this. It was the realization that all those nights I spent waiting for her, all those times I had kissed her goodbye at the airport, all those moments where I told myself I was being paranoid, were just wasted time. Time I could never get back. Time I had spent loving someone who had stopped loving me long before today. That I thought about every lie she had told me. Every trip she had taken. Every excuse, every half-hearted explanation, every carefully constructed story designed to keep me from asking too many questions. I thought about how easy it had been for her to look me in the eye and tell me she was going on a work retreat, a girls' weekend, a solo getaway to clear her head. I thought about all the times I had trusted her, believed her, told myself I was being a good husband by supporting her need for independence, her need for freedom, her need for space. And I hated myself for it. I hated that I had given her that trust so freely. I hated that I had been so naive. Because the truth was, she had never needed space. She had never needed independence. She had needed an alibi. And I had given her one every single time that I pictured her sitting next to him on flights, laughing with him, touching him, letting him have her in ways that were supposed to belong to me. I pictured her sneaking around airports, waiting for him in hotel lobbies, wearing outfits she never wore for me, putting on perfume that was never meant for me, slipping between expensive hotel sheets that had never been ours. And the worst part? I knew this had been going on for months, maybe even longer. Because affairs like this didn't just happen overnight. Affairs like this took planning. They took time. They took effort. And that meant that while I had been sitting at home, missing her, waiting for her, counting down the days until she came back, she had been counting down the days until she could see him again. That I didn't know what I hated more, the fact that she had done this to me or the fact that I had let it happen. That my mind kept going back to that message. Can't wait to see you up here again, gorgeous. I'll have the cockpit ready for you. It was so casual, so confident, like this was just a normal part of their routine, like this was something they had done so many times that it didn't even need to be disguised anymore. He wasn't worried. He wasn't hesitant. He knew she would come. He expected her to come. And that told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment mistake. This wasn't some impulsive decision she had made in a moment of weakness. This was deliberate. This was planned. This was something she had chosen, over and over again, knowing exactly what it meant, knowing exactly what it would do to me if I ever found out. And now, I had found out, but she didn't know that yet. That I could feel the anger building in my chest, slow and steady, like a fire that had been smoldering for months and was just now starting to catch. I had always thought of myself as a reasonable man, someone who handled things with logic, with patience, with control. But there was no logic here. No patience. No control. There was just the undeniable fact that the woman I had trusted more than anyone in this world had betrayed me in the worst possible way, and now I had to decide what I was going to do about it. A part of me wanted to expose her right then and there, to make her see that I knew, to watch her face as she realized she had been caught, to watch her scramble for excuses, to listen to her try to spin some ridiculous story about how it wasn't what it looked like, about how I was overreacting, about how I was making something out of nothing. But another part of me, a darker part, wanted to wait. Wanted to let her think she had gotten away with it. Wanted to let her board that plane, let her walk into her little fantasy world with her pilot, let her get comfortable in the arms of the man she had chosen over me. And then, I would take everything from her. I wasn't the type to let something like this go. I wasn't the type to sit back and let her rewrite the story to make herself the victim, to let her walk away clean while I was left picking up the pieces of the life she had destroyed. No. If she thought she could do this to me and walk away without consequences, she was wrong. She thought she was in control, she had no idea what was coming. I let her leave without saying a word. I watched as she grabbed her suitcase, checked her reflection one last time, smoothed out the wrinkles in her clothes, and walked out the door like it was just another normal day, just another trip, just another moment where she got to play the role of the devoted wife while knowing full well she was on her way to betray me again. The way she carried herself, the way she moved, so calm, so confident, so completely unaware that I had already seen everything, made me realize something. This wasn't just about cheating. This wasn't just about lies. This was about control. She thought she had full control over the situation. She thought she had perfected her routine so well that I would never notice, never question, never do anything other than wait for her to return home like the fool she had turned me into. She had taken my trust and weaponized it against me, used it as a shield to cover up what she was doing, knowing I would never suspect her, never push too hard, never dig deep enough to see the truth, but now I had seen it. And I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I waited until she was gone, then I started gathering everything I could. I went to her closet, looking at the clothes she had packed, the things she had left behind, the pieces of herself she didn't even bother to take with her. I checked her vanity, saw the perfume she hadn't packed, the jewelry she hadn't taken, the expensive things I had bought her that she clearly didn't care enough about to bring. She had packed light. Just the essentials. Just enough to make it seem like she was on a short trip. Just enough to fool me into thinking she wasn't going to see someone else. I moved to her side of the bed, looking at the nightstand she always kept locked. I had never questioned why she locked it before. I had assumed it was just her personal space, a drawer for things she didn't want lying around. But now I wondered if it was something more. I found the key easily, tucked away in the same jewelry box she had left behind. Careless. She had been so confident in her ability to deceive me that she didn't even think I would go looking. I opened the drawer, and inside, I found exactly what I expected. Receipts. Plane tickets. Hotel bookings. All of them for trips she had never mentioned, places she had never told me she had been. Some were old, dating back nearly a year. Others were recent. And then, there were the gifts, small, expensive trinkets, things I had never seen her wear, things I had never given her. A bracelet with an engraving in tiny letters on the inside. A watch that was too big for her wrist, clearly not meant for her, but something she had kept anyway. And then, the worst of it, a handwritten note, folded neatly, tucked away at the very bottom of the drawer, a note that confirmed everything I had already suspected. I picked it up, unfolded it, and read the words that made my blood turn ice-cold. It wasn't long, just a few lines, just enough to make it clear what was happening, just enough to take away any last shred of doubt I might have had. A name signed at the bottom, his name. The same name I had seen on her phone. The same name that had haunted me since I read that message. She had been careful, but not careful enough. I sat there for a long time, staring at everything, letting it sink in, letting the full weight of what she had done press down on me until I felt like I couldn't breathe. The lies, the deception, the absolute certainty that she had planned every detail of this without ever considering that I would find out. It made me feel something I had never felt before. Not just anger. Not just betrayal. Something deeper, something darker, something that made my hands clench into fists and my mind start calculating exactly how I was going to make sure she never saw this coming, that I wasn't going to confront her yet. Not here. Not in a way she could twist, not in a way she could control. She had been the one leading this game for months, but now it was my turn to make a move. She had made a mistake, and she didn't even realize it. She had left too many clues, too many pieces of herself scattered around, too many things that told me exactly where she would be, exactly what she would be doing, exactly who she would be doing it with, and I wasn't just going to sit here and wait for her to come home, that I wasn't going to let her step off that plane, walk through our front door, kiss me on the cheek, and pretend like she hadn't just spent the last few days betraying me. No, I was going to be there, that I was going to see it with my own eyes. I was going to watch her lie to me in real time, watch her pretend, watch her believe that she was still in control, and then, when the moment was right, when she was least expecting it, I was going to make sure she finally understood what it felt like to be blindsided, to have everything she thought was secure ripped away from her in an instant. She had no idea what was coming, that I sat in the silence of our home, surrounded by the weight of everything I had just uncovered, knowing that whatever life I thought I had built with her was already gone. The evidence was in my hands, in the ticket stubs, in the receipts, in the tiny notes and expensive gifts she had kept tucked away as if she thought I would never look. And maybe that was the worst part, how easily she had assumed I would never question her, how effortlessly she had crafted her world around the idea that I would never think twice about what she was doing behind my back. She had been playing this game for months, possibly even longer, and all the while, I had been nothing more than an afterthought, a placeholder in a life she had already outgrown. But she had underestimated me. She had made the fatal mistake of believing I would never put the pieces together, and now that I had, she had no idea that the rules of the game had changed, that I wasn't going to sit back and let this play out the way she wanted it to. I wasn't going to wait for her to return from another one of her so-called trips, expecting to slip back into her role as my wife, smiling in my face, telling me she was exhausted from all the meetings and delays, kissing me goodnight while still carrying the scent of another man's cologne on her skin. No, I had already decided I was going to be there. I was going to watch her step off that plane, her suitcase in hand, her carefully rehearsed expression in place, fully prepared to lie to me again, fully prepared to walk through that airport without a second thought about what she had just done. And when she saw me, standing there, waiting for her, the facade would crack. The game would be over. I gathered everything I needed: her flight details, the departure time, the estimated arrival. It was all there, sitting in her emails, waiting for me like a trail of breadcrumbs she never even considered I might follow. I packed a bag, not because I planned to go anywhere, but because I wanted to be prepared for whatever happened next. I didn't know what I would do once I was there, whether I would confront her the second she stepped off that plane, or whether I would wait, let her believe she had gotten away with it, let her play her part just long enough for her to realize she had already lost. I didn't know if I wanted to see his face, to see the man who had been taking what wasn't his, or if I wanted to walk away before I did something I couldn't take back. The drive to the airport felt longer than it should have, every second stretching out like time itself was mocking me, forcing me to sit with the reality of what I was about to do. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, my mind playing through every scenario, every possibility, every reaction she might have when she saw me standing there. Would she deny it? Would she try to act surprised, pretend she didn't understand why I was there, gaslight me into thinking I had misunderstood everything? Or would she drop the act completely, finally show me the version of herself she had been keeping hidden for months, the version of her that had never once felt guilty about what she had done? I parked in one of the farthest spots, sat there for a moment, staring at the entrance, letting the weight of it settle over me. The airport was busy, people coming and going, couples saying their goodbyes, families reuniting, travelers lost in their own little worlds, completely unaware of the storm that was brewing inside me. I walked inside, checked the arrival board, found her flight number. Delayed. Of course. Another 30 minutes added to the time I had to sit there, to wait, to let my mind keep running in circles around the same sickening thoughts. I found a spot near the baggage claim, far enough back that she wouldn't see me the second she walked out, but close enough that I would see her. I wanted to see everything. I wanted to watch her step off that plane, see the way she carried herself, see if there was even a trace of guilt in her expression. I wanted to see if she would check her phone the moment she landed, if she would send him a message before she even thought about me. The minutes dragged. My pulse stayed steady, my breathing controlled, but my mind was anything but calm. I had spent so long ignoring the signs, dismissing the gut feelings, believing the woman I loved would never do something like this. And now, I was moments away from seeing the truth unfold right in front of me. Then, finally, the passengers began to exit. I saw her before she saw me. She walked with confidence, her suitcase rolling behind her, her expression calm, collected, like someone who had nothing to hide. She wasn't looking around for me. She wasn't worried. She had no idea I was there, no idea that her carefully constructed reality was about to come crashing down. And then, just as she pulled out her phone, her fingers moving quickly over the screen, she looked up. And she saw me. The moment she did, everything changed. I saw the flicker of recognition, the way her body tensed just slightly, the way her grip on her suitcase tightened as she realized what was happening. Her expression shifted, just for a second, before she caught herself, before she forced her face into something neutral, something controlled. But it was too late. I had already seen it. I had already seen the moment she realized that I knew. She slowed her pace, hesitating, like she wasn't sure whether to keep walking or to stop and wait for me to come to her. I stayed where I was, watching, letting her make the next move, letting her decide how she wanted this to play out. She glanced around quickly, like she was checking to see if anyone else was watching, if she had any way out of this. But there was no way out. She had spent months weaving this lie, building this fantasy where she got to have it all: her marriage, her affair, her perfect little life where she could come and go as she pleased, where she could cheat and lie and still have me waiting for her when she came home. But now, standing there, her perfect illusion shattered, she finally understood. She wasn't in control anymore. I was. She stopped walking. It was only for a second, just a brief hesitation, but it was enough. Enough to tell me that she knew this moment was different, that this wasn't just another routine return home where she could slip back into the comfortable rhythm of lies she had built around us. She stood there, gripping the handle of her suitcase, shifting her weight slightly, glancing at the phone in her hand as if considering whether she should text someone, call someone, maybe even turn around and disappear into the crowd before I could say anything. But she didn't. Instead, she forced herself to move, her posture straightening, her expression slipping back into the careful, composed mask that had fooled me for so long. The same expression she probably wore when she stepped off every plane after meeting him, the same effortless ease of someone who had convinced herself she was doing nothing wrong. I watched her as she closed the distance between us, my heartbeat steady, my hands loose at my sides. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't breathing heavy. I wasn't losing control. If anything, I felt calmer than I had in months. Because now, finally, the illusion was gone. She wasn't my wife anymore, and not in the way that mattered. She was just a woman who had made her choices, who had gambled everything she had and assumed I would never notice. But I had. And now, she had to live with it. She was close enough now that I could see the way her eyes darted across my face, scanning for any sign of what I knew, what I had done, what I was about to say. There was a flash of something beneath her carefully constructed expression: nervousness, uncertainty, maybe even fear. She didn't know how this was going to go. She didn't know if I was about to cause a scene, if I was about to explode, if I had already packed my things and left. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't the one in control of the situation. She opened her mouth to speak, but I didn't give her the satisfaction. I turned, walking toward the exit without a word, and I knew she would follow. Because that's what she did. She performed. She played the role. She was never going to let herself look guilty in public, never going to let me walk away from her without at least trying to manipulate the situation back into something she could manage. So I kept walking, out of the airport, into the parking lot, hearing the sound of her suitcase rolling behind me, knowing she was still there, waiting for her moment, waiting for the opportunity to salvage what she could. But she didn't realize there was nothing left to save. I unlocked the car, got in, and she hesitated for only a second before doing the same. She set her suitcase down carefully, adjusted her seatbelt, exhaled softly like this was just another ride home, like this was just another flight where she had spent the weekend with him and was now returning to the life she had no intention of ever letting go of. But I wasn't playing along anymore. The drive was silent. She didn't speak, and I didn't give her anything. I didn't grip the steering wheel too hard, didn't tap my fingers in agitation, didn't give her a single reaction she could use to gauge what was going through my head. I wanted her to sit in it, to feel the weight of the silence pressing down on her, to wonder what I knew, how much I had seen, how much I had uncovered while she was gone. I wanted her to feel the same uncertainty she had forced me to live with for months, the same unease of not knowing what was real and what was a lie. She shifted in her seat a few times, checking her phone once or twice, but never typing anything, never sending a message. She was waiting, watching, trying to decide when to break the silence, when to start crafting whatever story she was preparing to feed me. But I wasn't interested in her words anymore. Her words had been nothing but poison, carefully measured doses meant to keep me complacent, to keep me blind, to keep me right where she needed me while she lived another life behind my back. When we pulled into the driveway, she hesitated again. Normally, she would have grabbed her suitcase, gotten out first, walked inside like she had nothing to hide. But this time, she waited. She watched me, her fingers tightening slightly on the handle of her bag, like she was trying to decide what to do, how to proceed. But I still didn't give her anything. I got out of the car, walked to the front door, unlocked it, stepped inside. And eventually, she followed. The moment the door shut behind us, the moment we were enclosed in the silence of our home, I felt the shift. I felt the way her entire body tensed, the way she hesitated just a little too long before setting her suitcase down, the way she exhaled a little too sharply like she was trying to steady herself before finally turning to face me. This was it. This was the moment where she had to decide how to play it, where she had to choose which version of the truth she was going to try to sell me, where she had to figure out whether to deny, to deflect, to turn herself into the victim or paint me as the paranoid husband who had it all wrong. And I watched her, standing there in the dim light of our home, the home she had spent months desecrating, and I realized something. I didn't need to hear her excuses. I didn't need to hear her twisted version of events. I didn't need her to justify what she had done. Because nothing she said would matter. The damage was already done. The woman standing in front of me wasn't my wife anymore. She hadn't been for a long time. The only thing left now was for me to decide what to do next. She stood there, her back straight, her hands gripping the handle of her suitcase a little too tightly, her lips pressed into a thin line like she was preparing for something, but I could see it, the hesitation, the calculation, the way she was weighing her options, trying to decide what her best move was. She had spent so long believing she was in control, so long believing she had the perfect cover, the perfect balance between two lives, and now, for the first time, she wasn't sure. She wasn't sure what I knew. She wasn't sure if I had found anything. She wasn't sure if she could lie her way out of this. And that was the only reason she hadn't spoken yet. Because she knew that if she said the wrong thing, if she guessed wrong about what I had uncovered, she could destroy whatever illusion she was hoping to salvage. I didn't say anything. I let the silence stretch between us, heavy and suffocating, watching her, letting her sit in it, letting her feel the same unease that I had lived with for months, the same uncertainty that had haunted me while she went on her trips, while she smiled at me and told me she loved me and made me believe that I was the only one. I wanted her to feel the weight of it, to feel the pressure of standing in front of someone who knew the truth but hadn't yet decided how to act on it. I wanted her to feel that fear, that moment of pure, gut-wrenching panic when she realized she had lost control of the narrative, and then, finally, she spoke. Her voice was careful, measured, just a little too controlled, like she was trying to gauge my reaction with every word she chose. But I wasn't interested in her words anymore. They meant nothing. They were just noise, just another layer of deception meant to keep me tethered to the version of reality she wanted me to believe in. I had spent months believing in that lie. I had spent months thinking that I was the one who was overthinking, the one who was paranoid, the one who needed to trust her more. And now, I knew better that I walked past her, heading for the living room, not because I wanted to sit down, not because I needed a break, but because I wanted her to follow. I wanted her to feel like she had to come after me, like she had to be the one chasing me now. And she did. I heard her footsteps a second later, the slight hesitation before she moved, the way she was already trying to recover, trying to adjust, trying to get a read on me. But I gave her nothing. I sat down, leaned back, exhaled slowly like I wasn't in a rush, like I had all the time in the world. And then, I finally looked at her. Really looked at her. She was still standing, still gripping her suitcase like it was some kind of anchor, like it was the only thing keeping her steady. And that was when I saw it. The flicker of something behind her eyes. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't shame. It was something else. It was frustration. Annoyance. Like she was angry at me for not reacting the way she expected me to. Like she was waiting for the explosion, waiting for the confrontation, waiting for me to demand answers so she could spin her story in whatever way benefited her most. She was waiting for me to give her an opening, to give her something to work with. But I wasn't going to. I had spent too much time playing her game. Now, it was my turn to make her play mine. She shifted her weight slightly, exhaled, finally let go of the suitcase handle, but her hands went straight to crossing over her chest instead, another barrier, another sign that she was still in defense mode. She was still trying to salvage something. Still trying to get ahead of whatever was coming. But she couldn't. Not this time. That I pulled out my phone, not breaking eye contact with her as I scrolled through the pictures, the messages, the receipts, everything I had found. I took my time, made sure she could see what I was doing, made sure she could see the moment she recognized what was on my screen. And there it was. The way her breath hitched just slightly, the way her fingers twitched against her arm like she wanted to reach out, like she wanted to grab the phone and throw it across the room before I could show her exactly what I knew. But she didn't. Because she couldn't, she had lost it. I turned the phone toward her, held it up just enough for her to see the screen, just enough for her to read the message that had started it all, the message from him, the message that made it clear what had been happening, how long it had been happening, how deeply she had betrayed me. I watched her face as she read it, watched the way her expression shifted in real time, the way she tried to keep herself from reacting, the way she forced herself to stay composed even as the walls of her carefully constructed lie came crashing down around her. And then, finally, she looked at me. This was the moment. The moment where she had to decide if she was going to deny it, if she was going to fight, if she was going to try to salvage something. But she didn't. She just stared at me, her mouth slightly open, her body completely still, and I realized something in that moment. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't ashamed. She wasn't devastated that she had been caught. She was angry, angry that I had found out. Angry that she hadn't gotten away with it. Angry that I had ruined whatever plan she had in place, and that was all I needed to see. That I set the phone down on the coffee table, leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on my knees, meeting her eyes with a calm that I knew unnerved her more than any shouting ever could. Because she wanted me to explode. She wanted me to yell, to scream, to demand answers, to give her a way to twist the situation back in her favor. But I wouldn't. I just smiled, and then I told her exactly what was going to happen next. That I told her that I had already spoken to a lawyer. That the papers were ready. That all I needed to do was sign. I told her that I wasn't going to fight for the house, that she could keep it, that I didn't want anything that had been tainted by her lies. I told her that I had already made arrangements to be gone by the end of the week, that I had no interest in dragging this out, in giving her any more of my time than she had already stolen. I told her that she could have her freedom, that she could have him, that she could have whatever life she had been building behind my back. And I told her that I didn't care because I didn't, not anymore. And that was the moment I saw it, the realization in her eyes, the shift in her posture, the way her entire body tensed as she finally understood. She hadn't just lost, she had never mattered enough to win. She had spent so long believing that she could have everything, that she could lie and cheat and manipulate her way through life without consequences. But now, as she stood there, her mask slipping, her perfect world crumbling, she finally saw the truth that I had already let her go. That I stood up, grabbed my keys, and walked past her without another word, and I never looked back.